Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Possession. This film came out in 1981. It was directed by Andrzej Zulawski. Zulawski is a Polish director, and he's known for making very challenging European films, art house films, that really push to the outer edges of what is concrete. That's sort of where he lives. It's his sweet spot. I think Possession might be his only film that he ever made that's in English, and it is, I think, one of his more famous films. It was quite controversial when it came out, to the point where it's really tough to find the full unedited version. But when you watch it as intended, it is a very ambitious film. Very ambitious. And it's tackling so many different themes at once, and it's in style, it's very abrasive, it's volatile, and it feels like it's just all the time just shrouded, overpowered with viscera. And it's like shrill emotion. It's painful emotion, not particularly pleasant to watch all the time. It's like the feelings of these people are just bleeding from like their ears, their eyeballs, their nose, everything. And it has a keen awareness, the film does, and the story. It's very confident about itself. And I think a lot of that comes from kind of some inner introspection, some inner strength. I think to be able to go to those places and to be able to explore them as a creator, as an artist, to be able to go to such intimate places, all of these really kind of deep, seething pains of the soul, you've got to, at least I hope so, I think you should be able to face them yourself before you go into that. Kind of plunge yourself into the abyss to experience it so that you can kind of recreate that viscera and what it takes to get there. And it obliterates the ego, and you're able to transcend through it. Trying to examine and explain, though, what humans want and what we feel and all of that and what makes us tick is naturally nearly an impossible task. Nobody has those answers fully. But I think that's what's so great about the film is, a lot of its claims, or whatever you want to say, it's a lot of them are left to interpretation. He's exploring so many different facets of humans through abstractions, and it becomes this weird blend of emotions that are all over the spectrum. So he's like really terrifying us at times. But through that terror, it kind of seeps into this kind of surreal, very erotic sort of place. And it's psychedelic in a sense, and it's also bizarrely funny. It covers so many aspects of consciousness for us, all the experiences and the sensations that we feel. This film is really hard to pinpoint. It's hard to kind of figure out what you think the full film means as a whole. But I think within the ambition of the film, though there are a lot of pots cooking, we do reach a certain clarity, and I think like a closeness with the characters, and that's ultimately where our knowledge comes from. Once we learn to empathize with them, that's when we start to see a lot of the themes come to fruition. He's presenting all of this to us through this kind of Euro trash horror genre lens, so that it is palatable to an extent, but he's also kind of yanking the carpet from underneath you, because it is more experimental and it's more sophisticated than a lot of those, more daring. This film is very much rooted in the environment in which it takes place, and that is a place of serious destruction and paranoia. So politics weigh heavily in this film. It's not something that's really delved into in terms of the story, but it's just kind of like that oppressive symbol that's hanging just kind of like a cloud. It reminded me a lot of the Suspiria remake at the beginning, which also uses the Berlin Wall outside of their dance studio as a metaphor for things. However, when you watch it in Possession, it feels so much more solid and so much more focused than that one, and it seems to have a better grasp on the external symbols as well as the internal. Zulawski grew up in that atmosphere, and it shows the idea of a post-war Europe and settling into the aftermath of things. Those are things people don't ever think about. They often think about the big event, but they don't think about what it takes afterwards to regroup. And I think that's a really interesting place to be. Because, after war, what happens? You want the war to end so badly, a lot of people, but then you've got soldiers returning home to families, and there's just going to be this disconnect. Something really big just happened, and you're never going to be the same. You're trying to kind of pick up the pieces of your life to continue it with some sort of normalcy and some sort of routine, but a lot of times it's nearly impossible to do, especially if you've gone through a lot of suffering. It's also like the Suspiria remake in the sense that, yes, the Berlin Wall is right outside the apartment of the main characters in Possession. And yeah, it's a political divide, but it's an emotional divide as well. You have a husband and wife named Anna and Mark, and they're played by Sam Neill and Isabella Gianni. And the child, when you meet him, is constantly mimicking the sound of the sirens that he's hearing outside of the apartment, which is really eerie. And you do see that as a theme that runs through it, and it does come back, especially in the end of the film. But the husband here, Mark, is coming home, not from war, but from a job because he was, you know, he's a spy and he's been gone for a long time. He comes back home to discover that his wife does not want to be there anymore and doesn't want to live with him anymore. This is expressed artistically in a way that is hard to describe. It's something that you really just have to experience for yourself. And I do feel that way. This is a hard review to do for me because I really feel that this is such an experience-driven thing that you're not really going to understand it until you really see it for yourself. But I will say that especially in the early scenes, the scenes where they're really going at it, they're really fighting with each other, the camera is expressing a lot of what they're feeling in so many visual ways and tonal ways. The cinematography just throughout this movie is crazy. I mean, it is so unrelenting. It's constantly moving and it's contrasted. It's like it has a sort of icy control at times where it's very fluid and following kind of distant from the characters. And then at other times, it's just right in there, just wedging itself kind of between these two characters, getting into their personal space to the point where it does feel invasive. And it's always the most painful moments between the characters that starts to happen, which, yeah, it's very vulnerable and violating, it feels like. The scenes where Anna and Mark are fighting, the camera is constantly dividing them up within the frame. So they always feel like they are on two completely different pages, two completely different wavelengths. But the camera is also constantly moving in a very visceral way, really building on a lot of the extremes of those two characters. And it feels almost like an action sequence, especially for Anna. I think she's the one who creates a lot of that turmoil. And like I said, Anna is played by Isabella Adjani, who I think is this performance is one of the most bold, one of the most powerful performances I've ever seen. And trying to understand her, I think, is the key to unlocking a lot of the film's true meaning, even if it is very open to interpretation. For me, and again, this is what I take away from it, I have my own experiences that allow me to kind of filter the film accordingly, but to me, she is completely lost to her own madness. And yet there are aspects of her within that insanity that I think are very powerful and very compelling. And it's because of that toxicity that so many characters get riled up around her. And who is she? I mean, she is a mother, but should she be a mother? Probably not. I love the moment where she's going, like, you know, she's frantic all around the apartment, and then Mark comes in and he's like, "What are you doing?" And she's grabbing all these clothes and she's like, "I've got to go to the laundry." And then she like puts the clothes in the refrigerator, and you're just kind of like, okay, she's a wife, of course, but should she be a wife? Probably not. Maybe at a certain point she should have been a wife, but certainly not anymore. She is more, I think, just a product of her own repression. And I think in that way, what that can do, what repression can do, is kind of harden you into a masochist of sorts that turns sadistic, and in her case, she's turning it outward as well. You see a lot of these themes in Antichrist, which is directed by Lars von Trier, and you see it in the Charlotte Gainsbourg character. And I think that there's a similarity to those two characters in the sense that I think Anna's failures kind of have to do with that claustrophobic feeling of really not knowing your identity as a mother, as a wife, but mainly more so as a woman. Only knowing what is expected of you and what is projected onto you and how that can affect how you perceive yourself. Maybe her undoing is brought on by her own like self-inflicted hatred, whether it's through internalized misogyny or natural submissiveness that is just kind of a natural instinct in women, but I don't know. I think submission and dominance, you know, that's very black and white to dismiss it as such. They're a lot more complex than that, and I think, you know, within this character especially, she's wanting to gain that control and find that dominance within her. But she's a very volatile woman, so as she's protesting in this way, she's fighting against that suffocation. It comes out through chaos and violence, which allows the story artistically to really push into dangerous areas of the psyche. So it's pushing into the surreal. So in a sense, we're losing reality, and everyone else's reality around her is falling apart too. Mark, as a husband, he doesn't understand her necessarily. He's drawn to her toxicity in a way that's really dangerous. But I think he's actually confused about his feelings for her and that love. It's very misguided. And I think that if he maybe had a chance to reflect on this situation years later, if that were possible, I think he'd see that he really doesn't love her anymore. I think he just thinks he loves her. I think he's just, it's a weakness, a fear of letting go. He needs a lot of self-reflection of his own, but I do think, I think that to an extent he is well-intentioned. I mean, he does want to keep the family together and wants to, have a family unit naturally. But at the same time, a lot of his desires come through that more so. It seems more as the movie's going on that it's more to meet his own needs, like to support his own weaknesses as a person. He says to Anna, I think kind of close to the beginning of the movie, something to the effect of, when he's away from home and working and he can't be with his family, he kind of just likes to picture her as somebody else, kind of completely disconnected. And then when he comes back and sees her in person, he wants the person that he knows, the person that he expects. It is a sort of need for control of his own, of preserving that ego and that dominance. And that's where the whole fragments of a person comes into play, which is a big theme in the movie. We want to see people the way we want to see them and not necessarily accept them fully as a whole person, accepting all of their flaws and all of that. But what's so dangerous is that happens so often in all kinds of close relationships, but especially in a marriage where you've got a child that you're trying to protect. But we see this represented in Anna's doppelganger first and foremost, and that's Helen. And Helen, she seems like this idealized woman, or I should say like a romanticized version of Anna. And she is, I mean, she wears all white compared to Anna, who wears a lot of dark colors, a lot of like dark purples and dark blues, but she's very ethereal and really beautiful, very maternal and nurturing towards Bob. She seems very kind, but she's also very insightful and has a really strong point of view on humans and the weaknesses of the flesh. And I think that this is obviously very refreshing for Mark. And perhaps seeing all of these qualities in Helen, that he's latching onto her because those are the parts of Anna that maybe he was drawn to in the beginning. Perhaps those aspects of her were more prevalent at a certain point, but they've slowly disappeared as she's had this downward spiral. But what's important to note is that, yeah, maybe it's aspects of Anna for sure, but that's not all of who she is. No one is that perfect, but nobody's that imperfect either. I think we're all flawed, but we also have our strengths. And it's all necessary to become human, as much as we want to reject those flaws. Anna is doing the exact same thing in terms of the way she's perceiving Mark, and she's creating the aspects of Mark that she wants to see, but not who he truly is. Because she's seen him when she pushes him to the limits, and he's seen her when he pushes her to the limits. And that's something that's, hard to get out of your mind once you've gone there. And perhaps she sees Heinrich, who's the guy that she's cheating on Mark with, as all the things that Mark isn't. But she doesn't really love him necessarily. He feels like an escape for her. And maybe that has an influence in how she's recreating Mark in her own eyes. Heinrich is amazing. I love him in this movie. The character, he is such a piece of work. And really, he's like Mark's ultimate antagonist. He's just the person, he's just this awful villain to him naturally, because he's the guy who is having sex with his wife. And he's really seems jealous of Heinrich because he sees him as this very suave, but very like cool guy who's seemingly so in control and has such an outlook on the world. But a lot of his musings, he's very pseudo-intellectual. At least that's how he appears to be. And all of this is just a cover-up for who he truly is. So our perceptions of him change very dramatically throughout the movie as well. He wants to transcend, yet he misses the point of what it means to transcend. Like, he thinks he understands it, but really he's still rooted in the pleasures of the flesh, just like anybody else is. The more you see him, really, the more ridiculous he becomes. And the scenes between him and Mark are hilarious. They are really, really interesting. As there's especially one, I think it's the second time that the two of them meet, and it's like their homoerotic tension mixed with this like primal violent anger towards each other, and it feels like performance art. I may have said that already, but I love that about it. And I love when you get those very strange performances out of actors, because it's really pushing the edges of reality into abstraction. It's exaggerated, but at the same time, it's really not that different from how people really are and how pathetic we are. And it's really sad. I love the line when he sees Anna again at the end of the film, and he says, "I'm the only man who has rights on you because I don't claim any." That's a good line. I think it perfectly sums up his character. Thinking he knows so much, but being just like the rest of them and not really understanding her. That selfishness and that ego and that fragility just all comes through in that moment. And then by the end of the movie, the audience and Mark, we see him very differently. We perceive him very differently because we see him as a whole, the full facets. They are pathetic and they're very empty. And Anna, with her, parts of herself and her character, she refers to it in a very important scene in a monologue where she's talking about sister faith and sister's chance. That's how she talks about the two aspects of herself, or the two main aspects of herself. When I watched this the first time, I instantly thought, okay, I'm thinking naturally Helen, her doppelganger, and herself. And, she's needing both faith and chance to exist, meaning that you need kind of multiple facets of a person. You need the light and the shade in order to be able to exist in reality. But I think it's really interesting the way that she's delivering this monologue, because it takes place in a dance studio where she is teaching these younger dancers, it's like ballet. And that is very telling, I think, because what is ballet? Ballet it's very regimented, and it has a militaristic quality. You've got formations, and you've got, you're at the bar, and everything needs to look very kind of clean and symmetrical and perfect. And there's a lot of reputation in dance and different dance companies of, like abuse when it comes to certain methods of training. Just naturally, ballet has a rigid kind of restricted style, but yet it's very beautiful at the same time. You have to have a certain posture, and you're in these point shoes. It's unnatural. And it says a lot about kind of women and that weird contrast between pain and beauty. And we see that a lot as well in movies like Black Swan and The Red Shoes and so on. But it's cool. And I like that it's used here to expose Anna and what she feels about herself, because while she's talking, she's trying to fix, show this young dancer how to do something properly, how to be successful. The way she's doing it is very aggressive. She's like, no, you have to tighten your stomach, and you've got to, pull your leg this way. And it's really uncomfortable. What's so uncomfortable about it is while she's doing it, and the dancer's clearly upset, she's looking directly into the camera. It is haunting. She's trying to show her maybe what she needs to survive in the society, but she's also kind of torturing this young girl, because her madness and bitterness is starting to take over her. And that's the real tragedy, and something that I think is really sad just in the world, spreading that toxicity of who you are like a disease, and basically saying that, the only way to be successful is through repression, because that's what happened to me. The film says that faith must be protected like a child. That's a line in the movie, and there's a lot of ideas that I could go into and talk about that, but that would be more in like a special analysis sort of video. But I would say to that like, yes, but the opposite is happening, and it's not being protected here, because Anna, she is such a fixation for these men. So that's the last thing she needs right now in her condition. She does not need that in her life. She needs to get away, and she needs to focus on herself, rebuild herself and the aspects of herself that are healthy. And that's literally what she's trying to do, but she keeps failing. That scene where she is literally having that miscarriage, where the camera is following her, and it's a really long take. It is one of the most brave, most greatest performances I've seen in a long time. Just the way that she like uses her body. She's like writhing, and she's gyrating, and she's shaking, and she's beating herself up. She's rolling around on the floor. It's such a physically demanding performance. And I think it's not necessarily meant to be realistic, because it doesn't feel realistic. It feels, again, like in between reality and fantasy. It's in that abstract place. It's a lot like Gaspar Noé's Climax, which came out last year, which is heavily borrowing from this particular sequence when Selva has her acid peak, and she also kind of has this crazy kind of meltdown physical performance. That is not nearly as complex or nearly as well acted, I think, as it is in Possession, but there is definitely a thread that brings those together, and that would be the abstract quality of it, the performance art quality of it. It's kind of dance, but not really. It's really visceral emotion, but not really. But it is a kind of a fury of it all, and that's the poeticism of it. Just through all of it, it's almost meditative, where you project all of these, feelings of your own onto it. And when I watch this one scene, it's like I experience, or I feel this deep pain for her. and I see kind of images of mental illness, maybe at its worst with a certain person, yet pushing to this transcendent place, pushing for something beyond it, like some sort of psychological and literal, in this case, rebirth. It's harrowing and devastating and thrilling. The whole film is like that. It's a mix of all these poetic moments and images that blend in such a way that we question reality and its meaning. When everything is upside down and jumbled to such a degree, we have to kind of pick up the pieces and examine them before being able to understand them as a whole. I'm still not sure if I understand this movie as a whole. And I think it demands multiple viewings before you really start to comprehend it pretty well. But I love the fact that it's always unfolding and always revealing itself to me. Sometimes it might feel unfocused, but then in other times I see all of the emotions and all of these symbols, ironically, finding some sort of weird harmony. It's just not typical harmony. Through kind of exaggerated ideas and surrealism and all of these contrasting ideas and feelings, that can often plunge you into an abyss to such an extent that you have to question things. And that's where a lot of revealing truths come out. And that's why art is so powerful. This film is amazing. It is amazing. It is one of those movies that I think about a lot, and it affected me a lot, and it won't leave me anytime soon. It is not easily digestible. This is one of those movies that it's going to be for a certain type of person and definitely not for other types of people. But I think even if you're not a fan, there are things to admire in it. I think there's a lot to ponder at the very least. And even if you like it even less than that, there's got to be some sort of image or some moment that connected with you, I feel like, because they tend to be branded into your brain. But it's essential art house viewing, that for sure. I mean, this is a movie that is so far up my alley. And it relates to everything that I love, from the surreal to horror, horror genre. I love very psychedelic and examining the human condition in such unique ways, and then transcending beyond it. So it really does feel like it's like a movie version of a psychedelic drug. It's abstract, as I've said probably 1,000 times already in this review. It's sexual, and it's violent, and it's moving. It's layered. What more could you want in your art and in film? I think it's the kind of film that just plunges you so hard into uncomfortable territory that it's like it kind of forces you to examine so many things, and that is so important to me. I mean, I think we're in this world, and especially when it comes to like our art house and auteur viewing, we get so stuck on the aesthetic of things rather than really understanding what all of it's supposed to mean. And I think that this is the kind of film where you can peel apart these symbols all day. So yeah, if you haven't seen it and this sounds like something that would be even of remote interest to you, I say go for it, jump in and enjoy. And that is my review. Thank you all for listening. All of my social media information is below. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.